okay, so things are going bad, but my grandpa, now I'm living back and forth with my grandpa. Now the thing with my shots messed up. But the thing about my grandpa was it's like a blessing and a curse at the same time, because while I'm living with my grandpa's starting to introduce me to philosophy, because my grandpa was a metapsychiatrist, psychologist, and a philosopher. So I'm starting to have conversations with my grandpa. Even though I feel like he really screwed up the situation, at the same time, he started introducing me to philosophy, and that's what eventually would lead to me discovering the quadrant model. Like, when I say this, sometimes people think like, oh, so your grandpa taught you the quadrant model? No, my grandpa just taught me philosophy. And I think that I discovered the quadrant model just because I was exposed to a lot of philosophy, which gave me a lot of knowledge, which made me more susceptible to the discovery of the quadrant model. So I'm living with my grandpa, and we're having philosophical conversations, and my grandpa's telling me about, Buckminster Fuller and, awareness and like meditation type of stuff. And he's teaching me things about like metapsychiatry. Like, one of the things that metapsychiatry teaches is this notion called like self-confirmatory ideation and self-confirmatory behavior. And so basically metapsychiatry was founded by a guy named Dr. Thomas Hora, and he wrote some books. One book is called like Beyond the Dream, and the other book is called Existential Metapsychiatry. And it's just a form of psychotherapy, but it incorporates spirituality. So it's a kind of psychotherapy that's spiritual. And it's kind of a mix. He incorporates Buddhism and Taoism and Christianity, and as a way to like heal people. And his one of his biggest notions is just the idea of self-confirmatory behavior and self-confirmatory ideation. And his whole notion is that there is no thing, and everything is one, but there is no thing, and there's the illusion of the self. Now, my grandpa's idea in regards to that is different than Dr. Hora's. But when I read Dr. Hora's book in 2020, I never really understood it until I read his book in 2020. He would talk about how the universe, according to some physics theories, is a hologram, and that therefore everything is just an illusion, and that it's just a projection of a two-dimensional surface, and that's why there's no self. Now, my grandpa's idea was different. He's like, everything is energy and it's all one, so then there's no self. But anyways, the idea is self-confirmatory behavior. So like one example of self-confirmatory behavior would be like bitching or complaining, like that you do that in order to like to bolster your ego and to make excuses for your ego. And the idea is you want to transcend the ego, transcend the self, and and be in the flow. And the flow is what I would later understand is pure awareness. And I never understood what my grandpa meant by that, like until like 2020 or even later. Because at the time when my grandpa would tell me about like pure awareness, I'd listen to him and I'd be like, I don't like that, because I thought he was just talking about like some sort of meditation where you just like become dull and dumb and just our awareness or something. But now I understand what he meant by that was like pure awareness, where you see things the way that they actually are without any contamination of your ego. But at the time, I didn't understand what he was talking about. I thought it was just like pure awareness, and I thought that was just some sort of like meditative state or something. I didn't understand him. And he did a bad job teaching me. He got me really confused, in my opinion. But regardless, I would start having these conversations with them, and I think that my conversations with them did help me to learn a lot, so that eventually when I was and it gave me a lot of knowledge. So then when I was in college, I was able to discover the quadrant model, because he introduced me to some deep ideas, and that just made me, in my opinion, just more intelligent, like a smarter person. So it was kind of a blessing and a curse what happened, in my opinion. So maybe if it wasn't for the if it wasn't for the Shugoi machine, and my grandpa maybe would have never come. So I look at it in that positive perspective. Like, man, my grandpa would have never come to live with me, and then maybe I would have never discovered the quadrant model, But regardless, at that time, things were not going good with me and my dad. I'm starting to live with my grandpa, but we're having some philosophical conversations. But the point is, though, my grandpa didn't understand what was going on with me and my dad. So my grandpa thought, this was my grandpa's notion. He was like, well, what's happening with you and your dad is...
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking to me.
No.
Sorry.
He said, what's happening with you and your dad is that, you just want independence. This is my 11th grade year of high school. He says, really common that people in high school want independence. They want, so you resent your dad because your dad and your mom because you're still dependent on them, and that's why you're fighting with your dad. That's what the problem is. He didn't know because my grandpa came in from Kauai. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't know about the Shule machine. I didn't know the Shule machine was the problem. So he comes in and he comes up with this idea. So he's like, yeah, really what you want is independence. And that's a big part of his like metapsychiatry is like, because once you're because his idea is like there's different levels of software. And so long as you're independent, you're going to be stuck in impersonal lower levels of software, because his notion is that if you're independent on people, then you're going to develop ally enemy software where if they do what you want them to do, then they're your ally. But if they don't do it, then they become your enemy. And my grandpa says that's a lower level of impersonal software, which is action oriented, which, it's one of the lower levels, and because then you're going to want to harm the people that aren't doing what you want. And the way that you can, mitigate that is by becoming independent and not needing anybody for anything. But in my opinion, dude, some people need people. And the way that I was is like, I'm a 5W4 and an INTP, a 5W4 Enneagram INTP. And like the way that I am is I like, I like to study, and I like, I needed a lot of help. Like I continued to need help from my mom and my dad, but then my grandpa comes in and my grandpa's like, no, what the solution to all this is you just need to completely separate from your mom and dad. And you need to just be completely independent, and then you're going to be happy, because all this is just boiling down to you being independent. And in my mind, I'm like, dude, I do not need to be independent. I need to fix my shot. And my whole life, my dad helped me with my shot. I don't need independence. I need I need more help. I need some support. But I didn't explain it to him like that at that time, because at that time I was just confused. I didn't know what was wrong with my shot. I didn't know it was a Shule machine. So at that point, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just in a horrible place at that moment in my life. And then my grandpa comes in and he makes things 1,000 times worse. Like I said, this makes things 1,000 times worse. So he's like, yes, independence is what you want. Now looking back at it, I'm like, okay, that was the beginning of the end. If it wasn't for the fact that I discovered the quadrant model, my life would have been ended at that point. So yeah, so then my grandpa's like that. And then my mom and dad are like, okay, yeah, Ryan needs independence. So let's get rid of him and get him out of our life. And then, and that's really what he wants. And I didn't understand it. So I'm listening to my grandpa. I'm like, well, maybe my grandpa's right. Maybe I do want independence. Like, I didn't know what was going on. But at the same time, I'm like, no, but I don't want independence because I need my dad to help me fix my shot. But so things were, to make a long story short, like, I'm just confused at that point. I'm suffering. Things are not going well. And then, so my grandpa's like, yeah, you need independence. And then my grandpa's also like, so at that time I'm fighting with my dad, and I'm like, Dad, when I scored that, when I played good against OJ Mayo, then you come in the next game and all that stuff. And then my grandpa's like, Ryan, you need to stop talking about the past. He's like, that's the problem. He's like, Jesus, because again, metapsychiatry incorporates just teachings of Jesus and teachings of Buddhism and the teachings of Taoism and stuff. So he's like, Jesus, he said, put down the plow and don't look back. And you're looking back and you're bringing up the past to your dad, but you need to let go of the past. And you need to, when you're in the flow, you're in the eternal present. You're in the eternal moment. So no more talking about the past. So now so in my opinion, what my grandpa ended up doing was he ended up setting up conditions that were like very conducive to my abuse, because you'll see what I mean in a minute. And when I get later into the story, but what he ended up setting up just like really screwed me up, and like it led to my parents. But now I want to say this though. My grandpa, he would say, no, I didn't do it. It wasn't my fault. Your parents just misinterpreted what I taught. And I understand what he's saying. So he would say, no, if you're in the flow, sometimes it is appropriate to talk about the past. When you're in the flow, there is no formula. Sometimes it is appropriate, and sometimes it is appropriate to be dependent when you're in the flow. You have to look at all the variables, and you have to look at all of the dynamics, and there isn't one formula. So my grandpa would say that, and he would say, yeah, your mom and dad, they misinterpreted it, and he said that my grandpa says that he cast pearls to swine, and they were swine, and they didn't have enough knowledge, and they did take his teachings, and they absorbed them into a lower level, what my grandpa would call a lower level of software, and they ended up misappropriating them in a way that was abusive to me. Now, that's what my grandpa says, but at the same time, I look at my grandpa and I'm like, yeah, but also you did it, dude. You also had that. You didn't understand the situation. I know that in his mind, I was the bad guy and I had problems and he didn't know how good of a basketball player I was. And everything he says to me, I know that he looks down on me. Everything. It's like, no, it wasn't because of the shoot away. It was because of you're playing against bigger, better players. And everything he says to me puts me down like that. And he's not able to see that. And oh no, it wasn't because of your dad didn't go to stop going to your games because you were because you were playing bad. It was because you were not treating him well. That's not true. And like everything that he says, and I'm gonna get into all that, but regardless, I do think he's right. They did misunderstand his teachings, and they did use them in a way that wasn't beneficial to me. But also at the same time, I think that he as well did not do a good job of teaching. And he says that. He says, I cast pearls of swine. And this is what he says. He says, I gave answers to questions that were not asked. She says, your mom and dad didn't ask the questions, and I imposed answers before they asked the questions. Now, but this is why I tell them, I say, well, since that's the case, why don't you tell them that? And why don't you tell them that what they're doing is not right and try to fix the problem that you created? But he says no. And then ironically, he says no. He says, I don't give answers to questions that are not asked. But I'm like, but you did that before and you screwed them up. So now try to undo it. But he's like, no, I don't give answers to questions that aren't asked. So my point is, he even admits it. He cast pearls of swine. He gave them teachings that were misused against me. But now he says that he's not going to fix it. But at the same time, he says this. But I know at the same time, he really just doesn't respect me because he doesn't respect me. And I know that in my opinion, he likes my dad a lot. He doesn't have much respect for me, and he thinks my mom and dad are very successful. He's living with them in Texas right now. He lives with them, and the way I see him like walk around with my dad, like he thinks my dad is hot stuff, and he really likes my dad, and he really likes, and he wants to make me into the bad guy. That's my opinion, but he also did help me in a lot of ways, and I'm grateful because, like I said, I don't think I would have discovered the quadrant if it weren't for him. But back to the topic. I'm living with him in high school, and he says, okay, what you really need is independence. And I'm a little bit confused, and I'm like, okay, sure. And then that was his big takeaway, like self-reliance, independence, and that's what's going to make me happy. But really what that ended up doing was it ended up, telling my mom and dad, like, oh yeah, my mom and dad misinterpreted it. And they're like, okay, yeah, he needs independence. Let's kick him out of our life, and let's be emotionally unavailable to him, and let's basically hate him. And that's what independence is. So, and ironically, they didn't even give me independence because they still ended up taking care of me, but they took away the emotional aspect of it. So my mom, like to this day, she still gives me stuff financially, but she just is not emotionally. She doesn't see me. My mom and dad don't see me. They don't talk to me. My mom will talk to me, but they will not see me. And it all derives back from this high school time when things were going bad. Now, like I said, things were going bad where there was abuse. And I mentioned I started punching walls and things started getting violent. Now, between me and my dad. Now, my mom and dad still remember that time. They still are stuck in high school time. So it's ironic because I'm not allowed to talk about the past. They say, Ryan, you're not allowed to talk about the past. But the thing is, and you need to let go of the past. But they're the ones who are actually stuck in the past because when I tell them, like, can I see you guys? Can I talk to you guys? Why can't I see you guys? My mom says, when I was right when I graduated high school, she was like, why would we ever see you? Don't you remember how bad you were in high school? Don't you remember that? And ironically, she's like, well, we're not going to talk about the past. Like, don't talk about the past. But then she's like, don't you remember that? And so she's still stuck in that. And yes, there was problems, and it had to do with the shooting machine. It had to do with me trying to fix my shot. And, fights started to occur. And there was one time when I did, the whole time it was mainly my dad grabbing me and throwing me to the ground and stuff, and I didn't fight back. One time my dad was going to attack me, he was going to hurt me, and I punched him in the sternum, and I broke his sternum. That was the one time when I ever touched him. But my point is, though, so they probably remember all that stuff, and they do remember that, and they're stuck in all that, and they think, yeah, they think I'm mentally ill. They think that I have, my mom says that I have obsessive compulsive disorder because she thinks, oh yeah, you're obsessive compulsive about fixing your shot. Yes, I was, because it was something that was very serious at the time, and I didn't know it was a shooting machine. And I'm trying to tell everybody, If it wasn't for the suicide machine, none of this would have happened. But in their minds, I'm a monster. I have serious problems, and I don't blame them. They're looking at what happened, and it was serious what happened. Everything that happened was very serious, and it was very traumatic. But they're stuck in that. And they're not willing to give me another chance to show them, hey, and they're not willing to open their ears and listen and try to understand the situation about what happened.